When a franchise is drained of all its creativity and energy, a new sequel emerges to drain the last drop of milk from the proverbial titty. After Shaman King 2021, the bland, rushed reboot that broke the hearts of Shaman King fans around the world, including myself, now comes Shaman King Flowers, a sequel that manages to actually be even worse. And much like Shaman King 2021, I really wanted to like Shaman King Flowers because it did have potential, it did have an interesting premise, but unfortunately, we got what we got. And I'll be honest, this show being disappointing is not in any way unexpected. As soon as I saw this was made by the same studio as the 2021 reboot, then I knew it was doomed, because the production issues would just carry over. The bland animation, the boring soundtrack, the overall dull presentation, the production issues just carry over, which leaves Flowers with its characters and storyline to carry the show. I have watched plenty of anime where the animation is subpar, but whatever is on screen, be it the storyline or the characters, are still enough to grip me to continue watching. Are the characters and storyline good enough to carry this show? Short story, no. Long story, we'll get to that. As a bit of background, since I've reviewed the 2021 series a while ago, Shaman King was the anime of my childhood. I loved Shaman King. I rewatched the 2001 series multiple times in multiple languages even. I read the manga, I played the video game for the Game Boy Advance, both of them multiple times as well. I really was in love with this franchise. I loved the very laid-back protagonist Yo, who was a really big contrast with most shonen protagonists at the time, perhaps even still to this day. I loved Kyoyama Anna, who was scary but also very refreshing as a female lead. I loved Hao, who was both intimidating and imposing and badass and mysterious. He was the perfect villain for my childhood self, and to me the whole concept of using spirits and imbuing them into objects was just mind-blowingly cool for my prepubescent self. And so this anime was one of the first anime that I watched, but it was the first anime that really clicked with me. And like so many people, I was ecstatic when the long-awaited reboot was finally announced, and I was also disappointed when we know how that one turned out. And some people say that, oh, at least the entirety of Shaman King is animated, and sure, but I don't know if that's actually a worthy trade-off. Is it better to have a crappy, dull adaptation, or to live in the hope of one day getting an actual good adaptation? Honestly, if someone really wants to watch Shaman King and they ask for my recommendation, I would still recommend the 2001 series. And yes, it was an early 2000s shonen. A lot of people will say that it wasn't as good as I remember it through my nostalgia goggles, but still, that show had a passion and a soul into it that the new one can't really replicate. All you need to do is just, for example, go check out the soundtrack for the old one and the soundtrack for the new one, and the difference is night and day. Yes, the perhaps very dated shonen from the early 2000s does not have the Sakuga clips that will leave all of the viewers pleasuring themselves and reposting the clips with fire emojis, but it had a soul, a passion that was very hard to replicate and that the new series completely botched, including of course Shaman King Flowers. Production issues aside, I went into this out of blind loyalty for my childhood self because there was a bit of a deep curiosity within me to really find out, okay, what happens to these characters that I grew up with? That was my main motivation coming in. And generally speaking, I'm not a huge fan of the Boruto style sequels where we just rethread the same storylines with the children of the main characters. I think it's just pure nostalgia bait and it's incredibly lazy writing, but this sequel, Shaman King in particular, in my mind, really had a lot of potential. What really makes Shaman King's ending stand out from most shonen endings is that the bad guy won. The good guys could not beat him, he was just stronger. They had to resort to plead with him because he could not be beaten in combat. He was always stronger, more experienced, more knowledgeable. It really is an ending that it may be a bit anticlimactic because you're used to the power of friendship prevailing and the good guys winning, and you know, an ending where it's mostly talking can be a bit boring for some people, but still it is an ending that really stands out and where the bad guy effectively wins. Just by that alone, I think it opens up a lot of interesting plot threads for a potential sequel, such as how does Hao being the Shaman King affect the world? How do the heroes cope with their loss? Do some of them become jaded? Do some of them work extra hard to become stronger? What happens to Hao's followers? What happens to the patch that organized the tournament? There are so many storylines you could go from. It really is a rich ending in order to facilitate a sequel. And then there's perhaps the most important storyline, which is Yo and Anna had a kid. And weren't they like 15 or so? Obviously, I'm not recommending this, okay? Stay in school, kids, stay in school. Regardless of what I think about the whole storyline, it is at least very intriguing. How will they be as young parents? How will they couple their parental responsibilities with the responsibilities of being shaman for the Asakura clan? What happens now that they are raising what is effectively the Shaman King's nephew? These are all very interesting questions. So do you see what I mean? Obviously, I'm not naive. I knew that this would probably not deliver on most of the potential that it has, but it could be more than just a final milking of a comatose franchise. It really had potential to be a lot more. Shaman King Flowers could change its genre entirely, just become a more mature slice of life for the fans that have grown up, and it wouldn't even need a lot of action scenes because from a storytelling perspective, it has so much stuff to go for. Unfortunately, none of that potential was realized. The opening for this show starts off with "Don't Take a Life of Imitation," which is presumably talking about Hana wanting to step out of his father's shadow, but at the meta level is an incredibly ironic statement because this show is just a carbon copy of the previous. Oh, and if you've made it this far in the video, then I assume you don't care, but spoiler alert, I will be spoiling a lot of things from Flowers, so you've been warned. Let's get into the characters. One of my main problems with this series is that the main characters from the previous one are nowhere to be found, and yes, there are story reasons as to why that is, but I strongly question that writing decision. The whole intrigue surrounding Yo and Anna as parents is just gone because they're gone, and so we are just left with Hana, the new protagonist, be left as a angstier, angrier version of Yo without his father to contrast. Every time Hana is on screen, because the character design is so similar and because he also uses Amida Maru, which of course he does, I can't help but think that I'm just watching a knockoff brand version of the original Shaman King. Hana definitely has a different temperament than his father. He's a lot less calm and a lot angrier, but I don't think that his inner conflict is explored enough, and I think that he is not the type of protagonist to really carry a show by himself. I think that the originals from the original show are sorely missed, and that is particularly noticeable when it comes to our main character. And what's up with the Asakura family and their fathers just going for a smoke during the formative years of their children? Why does this keep happening? And from a storytelling perspective, I can't emphasize how much of a blunder it is to me that Yo and Anna aren't here. It was one of the things I was looking forward to the most in this sequel, and they're just not here for no good reason at the moment. And okay, sure, maybe it will make sense later, so let's go into the other characters. So Hana the MC is technically being raised by Ryu, Tamao, and the Hanagumi witches that were part of Hao's team. The Hanagumi girls are just there in the background, they sometimes speak, whatever. Ryu is still a fun guy and he really fits into the role of grown-up uncle, but he really lacks the gravitas to be this sort of mentor character. He's still just a secondary character from the previous show, and not only is he not a good mentor, he's also not really presented in such a way, so he's just sort of there. And then there's Tamao, and by the Great Spirit, what did they do to her character? Shaman King as a series is no stranger to retcons. For example, the Osorezan arc, which a lot of fans like, including myself to be fair, doesn't make a lot of sense if you go back to the earlier episodes. It seems like a retcon, something that was written after the fact, but you know what, that's fine, not everything has to be super clean writing. And I get that people can change, but this Tamao is such a different character, it's almost bordering parody. She flipped 180, it's not even recognizable besides the pink hair. The shy, caring, introverted character is now a stern, intimidating authoritarian. Her character pretty much metamorphed into Kyoyama Anna's personality, which if you wanted to have someone like Anna as the parent figure, why not just have Anna instead? It's a weird turn for Tamao and it's completely unnecessary, and then we have a lot of recycling of storylines and scenes. For example, the show starts with Hana using Amidamaru to beat up some gangsters on the cemetery just like in the first series. By itself, I wouldn't really mind that scene, I would even enjoy it as I think it's a cute nod to the original. Unfortunately, this series nods so much that it breaks its own neck and it stops being cute. There's yet another main gangster with a pompadour, and why when Ryu is literally still on the show? Like, why is this character here? Then we have Alumi, our new heroine, our new fiancé for the main character, which in both appearance and personality is also a copy of Kyoyama Anna, so if you're keeping track, that's 2 clones now. Then we have the dude from the Brancha Sakura family whose spirit is just an evil version of Amidamaru, and they're very look-alike. Then we have Taoren's son, which is just Taoren with poop white hair, like, poor guy. Poor guy. And this is my main problem with this series, because by this point this isn't a sequel, this is karaoke, this is a cover band. Instead of building on top of the original, we're just doing a nostalgia tour with all the old songs. Just because the main characters from the previous series aren't here, it doesn't mean that it's okay to just put in cheap clones. As far as the new characters go, I also wasn't really impressed with most of them. The one dude in particular that looks like a Yu-Gi-Oh character is extremely jarring. His hair, it just doesn't fit the other character designs. Every time I look at him, it's like one of those weird filler collaboration episodes where characters from different series meet. It just looks super off. Now, for the sake of honesty and fairness, since I made myself watch this entire thing, let's talk about the things that I actually liked, which, yes, there are a few of them. The storyline with the Onis was interesting, the entire council of Shaman Kings was also a cool concept. I loved the plot twist with Iron Maiden Jun. I thought it was super dark and super out of nowhere. It almost seemed like a different series, but I enjoyed it still. From the new characters, I really like the capitalism spirit dude. I think his powers where he gains power through money is both hilarious and super interesting as a concept because it contrasts so much with what a shaman is supposed to represent, so I think he does have potential to become an incredible villain. And I also like the pilot dude from the final episodes. I think that Hana using Amidamaru was a bit lame, even though I like Amidamaru, and I think that a more edgy protagonist having a slightly more edgy spirit is also fitting. Having said all this, I don't think these two characters and these few plot points are worth getting into this series for, because everything surrounding it is not exciting in any way. The first few episodes in particular are incredibly boring. This series needed more fresh ideas, more drama between the old generation and the new generation, more cool things happening instead of just being a weird tribute to itself. In terms of presentation, much like the 2021 reboot, this feels super bland and uninspired, and in terms of writing, it feels like this series really phoned it in. It was super safe and boring when it really could have gone for something special. So I've made it clear, I don't like Shaman King Flowers, and to me it fails as both a sequel and a standalone series. As a sequel, it's mostly a worse version of the original. It will feel repetitive for fans of the original Shaman King, and it does not offer a satisfying continuation of the original series. And as a standalone anime, this will not attract any new viewers to the Shaman King fandom because, as I said, the first few episodes are incredibly boring and generic and will scare any viewer away, and also this series doesn't really explain anything, it just assumes that you watched the original, and so any new viewer won't really know what's happening or try to make sense of all of this, and won't really have much reason to care about any of this or any of these characters. So as far as I can tell, this show only really appeals to a tiny audience of people that watch the original show and will watch any sequel regardless of its quality, and if that's you, then I wish you the best. Speaking of tiny audience, as a funny side note, some of the Reddit threads for this were so empty that I was the only comment on them, and I don't really usually comment on Reddit, but I just had to because I just felt bad that the threads were empty, so that's a funny side note. Anyway, as much as it pains me to make this video, as much as I wanted to like this, as much as I wanted this to be good, as much as I'm still bitter that the reboot of my dreams for Shaman King never came and it ended up being a complete disappointment, it's time to let it go. Unfortunately, the series that attempts to criticize capitalism is in itself, ironically, a soulless attempt at a cash grab. This was it for me today, folks. Be sure to leave a like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys on the next video. Ciao!